Welcome to the Medovia Menopause Podcast, your trusted source for information about menopause and midlife. Join us each episode as we have great conversations with great people. Tune in and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Today we have Kim Crispeno with the Aftermath Agency with us. We're super excited about this conversation because we know Kim professionally, but we also know her personally, and she's our neighbor. So we're all in the same neighborhood. We've known each other for years, but professionally, we have high regard and respect for Kim and what she does. So I'm going to dive right in. And Kim, have you hop in here and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why maybe you started the Aftermath Agency.
Great. Well, thank you both for having me. It's kind of fun to be in a professional context with the two of you.
Yeah, for sure.
So as you mentioned, I'm a psychotherapist with the Aftermath Agency, which I co-founded. And that we co-founded, it's a group of licensed and certified professionals who focus on well-being from a number of different angles, because we believe that health and wholeness and well-being, you don't just approach from one angle. You have to hit it from a lot of different angles. So that's kind of where I am right now. The reason we started Aftermath, it actually begins with with my family's story. I have a child who had some significant mental health issues that manifested themselves when they were a preteen and teen. And that led us on a journey that we probably weren't very well equipped for, but both my partner and I consider ourselves to be, high functioning, resourceful, educated. And it was a full-time job for both of us trying to manage care and figure out what would help. And then it launched us into basically that child was a detonator in our family for everything in our system that needed to be looked at and examined and healed. And out of that, because we had financial resources that we could use, so grateful for that. But there were some unique circumstances in our situation that allowed us to access some state funding. That was huge. But we realized not everyone gets this kind of care or can even figure out how to find this kind of care. Excuse me. So we thought, could we provide something that it offers more wraparound care, resourcing, help for people who are in situations where it's kind of overwhelming. So that's kind of the vision behind it.
Yeah.
That's so inspiring. I mean, there's so many families that are faced with those things and are not sure what to do. And especially as the mama, it just tears you apart when you can't find the resources for your child. So I love that you took that and said, let's help others, because it was such a journey of learning and navigation. So that's so inspiring, Kim. Thank you for sharing that story, because I think that makes really sets the stage for the conversation.
Yeah, well, you're welcome.
And you see so many people through the Aftermath Agency. We've been fortunate enough to see your space, and it's beautiful. And we just had Trisha, your co-founder, on the podcast as well recently. But I know you also have a lot of women that are in midlife that are coming through your practice in one way or the other. And I'm curious because it is Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's why I wanted to have you on the podcast to specifically address midlife and menopause and mental health. How do you think that menopause influences mental health among midlife women? What are you seeing in your practice? What are you hearing? Tell us a little bit more.
That's a large
It is.
question.
Loaded question. How long do
However
we
you
have?
want to unpack that. Yeah.
Well, as you both are well aware of, hormones don't just control our bodies, they shape our mental and emotional world. And they have a profound effect on our mental health because they directly affect our and influence our brain function and chemistry, our mood regulation, stress response, energy levels, and emotional resilience. And so I absolutely adore working with perimenopausal and menopausal women, partly because they are coming in and they are raw, they are honest, they are feeling vulnerable, and most of them are like just open, like, how can you help me? I need some help. Some of them are pissed off. I
Mm-hmm.
think that feels to me like that's a little bit later in the stage. It doesn't always show up initially in perimenopause. Because I think often what I'm noticing in perimenopause, women are coming in and they have these symptoms that they think they're mental health symptoms, and they are, but they're very connected to what's going on in their physical bodies, and they haven't yet made that connection.
Right.
I think back to when I went into perimenopause, and I I think I didn't know I was in it. And I remember, I don't know what both of your experience was, but I think the initial symptom for me is I started dropping all the nouns. I could not, for the life of me, remember names, proper nouns, other kinds of nouns. And so, like, my conversations were just a hot mess.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids were like, Mom, do you have some early onset dementia
Yeah,
or
dementia,
Alzheimer's? And
right.
actually, I was actually a little bit scared about that
Yeah,
myself because there is
Sure.
Alzheimer's in my family.
mm-hmm.
And I didn't initially make the connection to hormones, what was going on in my body. I just thought, what is going on? I must. So that was my experience. I'm curious about the two of you, like when you kind of noticed.
Well, Kim, you go because you had the brain fog too.
Yeah, brain fog, sleeplessness, anxiety, uh, incessant worry. Yeah, those and the brain fog for me was I don't have a problem talking. I could talk all day long, just me to everyone by myself, and I didn't want to open up my mouth because I couldn't remember the words and I felt stupid all of a sudden because I couldn't I like the nouns. That's like you
Yeah.
can't remember what it is that you're saying. And that happens occasionally now, but nothing like what it was. And it was sort of an out of body experience, really, just to try and manage myself and my brain during that time. I'm
Mhm.
still dealing with the sleeplessness and the anxiety and those kinds of things, but because I've gotten help, it's so much better and manageable. But yeah, it was a scary couple of months as I was trying to figure it all out.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, for
It's so
sure.
interesting to hear everybody's story too, right? I went through early menopause. Kim, I don't know if you know that or not. I don't know if I shared
Mhm.
that with you, but it was extremely frustrating because healthcare professionals don't necessarily look at that as menopause, perimenopause, right? You're too early for that. So we're not looking at that. No one was really looking for that. So I was really at a loss, but a little bit of brain fog, but I had heavy flooding bleeding. I call it crime scene bleeding. Couldn't leave the house, gym in the middle of the night. My husband, we were like, what? You have to help me, right? I think I'm dying in the bathroom here. And fortunately, I had a flexible working environment, so I didn't have to show up in the office. But I had anxiety, I had depression, I was irritable. I look back on that now in hindsight and think, a lot of the challenges and just anger that I had in even in my marriage and frustration with the kids, was menopause. And I didn't realize it at the time until I started hormone therapy. And for me, that was a good choice because I reached early menopause, and for long-term health, I wanted that choice. But, divorce rates are high in individuals between 40 and 60. And that very well could have been where I ended up. So that anxiety, the irritability, the depression is real. And I was on antidepressants. The doctor said, here you go, take Lexapro. Let me know if you feel better in a couple of months. So I'm wondering, as we're kind of shifting back into that mental health conversation, do you see that where midlife women are coming to you not having the information from their healthcare practitioners? And are they coming to you in more of a state of desperation? How do they get to you? And what are you hearing when they arrive at your doorstep?
A lot of women come because they are experiencing the mental health impacts of perimenopause, menopause, and they haven't yet fully connected the dots to physical health. And so if you have a good mental health practitioner, they should always be ruling out a physical source of what's going on in your body. So when I'm working with any woman, 30s onward, or actually anybody, but they're coming in and they're presenting all these different symptoms, I am always saying, hey, are you working with someone on your physical symptoms? Have you had blood work done? Have you been looking at these things? Because it goes hand in hand. There still is the mental health aspect that I can help with, but I always see that we need the physical care. And I do find a lot of women struggling to find competent care, care that where they are not dismissed with what they are feeling, where it's not all in their head, where there's a lot of women have had trouble. And one of the things that, again, we're trying to do at Aftermath is create a robust database of resources of people that we trust that we can send people to. And we have a resource specialist. Her name is Meredith. She's wonderful. And she's available free to the community to help you resource if you need it. And we're like working with those relationships. Who are the people that are going to take you seriously when you walk into the office?
Right.
That is so important. I think in all aspects, for women in particular, in a lot of our experience, we've been invalidated. We've been told, oh, no big deal. You should be able to figure this out. And we tell ourselves that too. We dismiss our own experience readily. And so a lot of women come in and they don't even, oftentimes they're like thinking they're crazy or it's, they're just looking for somebody to get their experience who will take them seriously.
Yeah, it's a thing we hear all the time. And we talk about it's okay to divorce your doctor to find a good doctor. It's okay to go get your team together so that you have your therapist and you have your support system around this so when this happens to you, you can imagine that you probably get the same thing, but we get everyone's stories because they know it's a safe place to be able to talk about it. Have you identified any specific patterns or triggers that happen for women that exacerbate these mental health symptoms during menopause?
I would think that there are a few. If a woman has a pre-existing condition, if she's already struggled with anxiety or depression or even paranoia or things like that, if there's a previous condition that's being treated, then oftentimes that is worse. It gets much worse. And there's an interesting study out of that was published in, I think, Cambridge University Press in 2023, where and I know you all know this, but that if you have a pre-existing condition, usually it gets worse. That's connected to hormones. It gets worse during menopause, and the treatments that may have been managing it don't manage it in the same way anymore, and you need to make adjustments. So that's one thing. I would say another pattern is if there's an escalation in stress in any part of a woman's life, that also exacerbates things. Trauma. If a person has a lot of trauma, and this is where I don't know if you our listeners are familiar with a window of tolerance. Probably they are.
Unpack that a little bit. I'm not sure that everyone knows what that is.
Yeah.
Okay, so a window of tolerance is basically a concept in psychology and neuroscience that describes the optimum or optimal zone of arousal where a person can function most effectively. So when you're in that optimal window, you can think clearly, you can feel and process your emotions without overwhelm. You can respond rather than react to stress, and you can engage socially and make decisions. So when people have trauma or a lot of stress, whether it's chronic or acute, or if they're, excuse me, if they're feeling bad in their bodies, whatever, oftentimes our window of tolerance is small.
Right.
And so anything can push us to the edges or outside of that. And when we get to the edges of it or outside of it, then we find ourselves in a couple of states. So hyperarousal, which would be fight, fight or flee,
Right.
or a hypoarousal state where we kind of shut down, we're overwhelmed, all of those things. So that's, I think most of us are familiar with that. And so what happens is, like in therapy, I am working with to help a person identify what their window of tolerance currently is and what's going to help them stay in that. So what tools, techniques, things can help them stay in there and what they need to pay attention to. And then, but also in the therapeutic space, I'm actually working to try to expand their window of tolerance. But that I think has to be done carefully, right? We're working to increase our ability to tolerate distress. And it really helps if we have a person who's regulated, who's helping us do that. So I don't always try to get my clients to do that on their own outside. I want them to stay in their window as much as possible on their own, and then in space where I can help them work to increase it. So those are some of the things that I think I'm seeing when women come in that are patterns or triggers.
We get a lot of questions about, how much should I suffer before I go and get help? Right? We're always saying there is no need for suffering here. Like suffering is an optional thing. What strategies do you help women have to better understand and articulate how these mental health experiences are affecting them during menopause? And from the suffering point of view, when do you put up your hands and say, I can't do this anymore?
How much is too much?
Yeah.
Right? We hear, oh, it's not that bad. You don't have to suffer. Yeah. Great, Kim. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think part of that is, again, as we normalize this conversation and as we understand more, the sooner that we can get intervention and help, I think the less we will suffer. Right. And so one of the misconceptions that I see coming up with women is that we can figure this out on our own.
I'm smart. I've been able to do things before. I have figured things out up until this point. This is a thing that I can just put my head down.
I don't need help. Yeah.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Right. And I don't need help. Or there is, I think, another level of, this is where I think shame pops into the picture,
Yeah.
that we feel like there's something we're doing wrong. And so we kind of like, as women, we dig in our darn heels and we're like, I am gonna figure this out because, there's something wrong with me that I can't figure it out. And so we do stay in that state of not asking for help longer. So I think I would like to say a little more about shame, because I've been thinking about that in relation to this conversation. And Brene Brown, as we know, did a lot to, I think, help people understand the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt, I did something wrong or bad. Shame says I am wrong or I am bad. And I think that's helpful for common understanding. But there's a woman, Patricia DeYoung, and she wrote a wonderful book on shame called Understanding Chronic Shame. And her definition, I'm like, so she talks about shame as always being relational. So shame is one of those things that we experience in relation to someone else. So it triggers a feeling. Something triggers a feeling of something is wrong, and it's usually me. And her definition, though, is really interesting. She says, shame is the felt sense of a disintegrating self in connection to a dysregulating other.
Wow.
That's okay.
Wow, I know. You got to say that.
Tear that apart. I think say it again and maybe let's
unpack that a little bit.
Let's unpack it.
First of all, so she says shame. First of all, the first part, it's a felt sense. So it may not be true, but it's what we're feeling.
Right.
It's a felt sense that we are disintegrating. We have a disintegrating self. Something, is kind of, disintegrating in us. Like we're
dying, breaking down. I mean, are we, is
this your self-esteem?
This is right.
Yeah, but it's in the, in relation to, or in the presence of a dysregulating other.
So that's somebody else that's causing this for it happen to you, or something else?
Yes. And so for, like a lot of times, like if you're, oftentimes shame gets its hold on us in childhood. So we experienced a lack of attunement from a primary caregiver who doesn't read what we need. And so, in our young brains, we can't sort things out. So we begin to think, oh, something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
But what my question around this, why I wanted to bring this up is, what if in menopause, and I'm taking this loosely, but what if in menopause, the dysregulating other is ourselves?
Yeah, that is a good question.
And so in relation, as ourselves are dysregulated in our bodies and all of the things because of what's happening chemically in our bodies, and then we experience a sense of disintegration.
I can see that. Like if you take my brain fog example, I was ashamed that I couldn't come up with the right words. And I didn't want to talk because I felt like I would appear as not smart or not together or whatever. So I can see that shame really came in for me in that case.
Yeah. And so what if we could reframe menopause and, think about it as, oh, myself is going to be dysregulated in this time.
Right.
And we could begin to understand that and see menopause as a doorway into understanding more, our own patterns of disintegration, and then what is needed for integration. And unfortunately, women have this much harder, in my opinion, than men. Because we have all this stuff going on in our bodies.
Hmm.
And I just wish, how they have those period pain simulators that they
Yeah.
attach to men.
Oh, we do have a hot flash simulator over
Oh,
in the
you do?
UK.
Okay. I
Well,
was
no, we
hoping
don't,
that like,
but there is one. There's a Menopause that you can put on and simulate hot flashes. But
but what
yeah, so
about all
we
the other symptoms, all the other
yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. That's
right?
just
I mean,
one, right?
One, there's
there's
34
so many
plus.
One.
things that are like all happening at the same time for
Yeah,
us.
Yeah.
And this, like, yeah, sure, the hot flashes are miserable, but they are flashes. They're over
yeah,
fairly quickly. They may come a lot depending on how how much estrogen we've got going on in our
right,
system. But
right. Kim, I love this conversation about shame and menopause and reframing it and menopause being the doorway. And I'm really thinking about, what you do at the Aftermath Agency. And I think that there's also not just shame with, you know, losing your thoughts and brain fog and it being, we're used to functioning at a high level and what's wrong with me and it's my fault. I think there also is shame that can come with the need to talk to someone. I don't need to see a therapist. I don't need to see a mental health specialist because then something is wrong with me, right? Then I'm labeling myself and I've attached this label. When in reality, we know that seeking the help that we need is so beneficial in so many ways. But I love the idea of looking at it as a doorway, right? Just walk through the door, open the door, crack the door, and see what's on the other side, see what's inside. For you, and I often picture doorways myself. I'm a very visual person, as Kim knows. I have to stop and I have to visualize things. But for me, in that midlife stage, when I went through menopause and it was awful, I felt like I was closing one door and I was standing in an empty hallway and it was dark. And there were a couple of other doors that were cracked open, but I was afraid to go through them. So I stood in the middle, right? I stood in this blank, dark space for a long time before I had the courage to go through one of the other cracked doors. And it's that transition that I think is the hardest sometimes because there is shame associated with it, right? So we can look back and we might have shame from our childhood that we're trying to maybe shut that door and we're trying to move forward, but there's shame in seeking help and we're lost. And that's what I think is the saddest for me in this whole conversation and what we do with women in menopause, because it can be liberating. And sometimes there's hard work that needs to be done. Oftentimes there's hard work that needs to be done, but it can be liberating and freeing and beautiful on the other side. So, in that context, what would you say to someone if they are in that place and not quite ready to make the next step or they're carrying shame with them? How do we encourage our listeners to take that next step, to seek the help that they need?
so I'm curious, what helped you move forward? What helped you go into another doorway, if you can think of that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. For me, it was the tribe. Kim, you talk about this a lot. Build your tribe, build your
Yeah.
community around you. It was the friends, it was the encouragement that I had there, the spiritual support from my besties, and really a lot of introspection, which I think can be scary as well. So, I mean, I journal every day. I put my thoughts down on paper. I go for long walks, and that's my time to think and unpack. And I'm not afraid of that self reflection and work, but I'm not sure that everybody knows how to do that, right? If you haven't practiced that for years, even that's foreign, looking at a blank piece of paper and like, what do you mean you journal? What do you mean you unpack that? So I had a support network and I'm used to self-reflection, but I don't know that everybody has that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I think you articulated a couple important things in there. So I do actually really like the idea that menopause has the word pause
Mm,
Mm,
in it,
yeah.
because I think menopause is an invitation both to pause and to move.
mm,
And at different parts and different times in that story and in that journey, we're doing different things.
mm.
Right. And so you are describing a moment of pause where, you know, like you are like in this blank space. And I think along with shame, there's grief sometimes that attends to, that comes with menopause, even if we're not necessary. I mean, I was never sorry to let go of that period. I'll tell you that one right now. That was
See you later.
you go right ahead and leave. But there's also this sense of, oh, I'm getting older.
Mhm.
Mhm, mhm,
I'm aging.
mhm,
My body is changing. There are certain things now that are inaccessible to me forever.
mhm.
And not that I necessarily wanted them, but so there's grief there. And so I do think that in that pause, it is important to stop and notice what is there. Stop and be able to, you know, attend to what is there. But what you said that I think is so crucial is a lot of women do not know how to do that well on their own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, because we've been so freaking busy doing everything in our lives to keep everybody else going
Yeah.
and to help everybody else along, and to slow down and attend to ourselves is just something we don't have a lot of practice at.
Yeah.
So that's where community is really important. That's where starting to build some supports. And the women I uh, feel most concerned about that come into my space are the ones that really lack support.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and so that's one of the things we do. Part of
Mm-hmm.
my, like, at least mental treatment plan is how can we build support?
Yeah.
How can we, help this person find connection, find community, find validation, like, so they realize they're not alone
Yeah.
in this journey. And then at some point, I think women want to move.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They
Mm-hmm.
don't want to stay standing still too long, which is good because I think our bodies are designed to move us into new things, to new places. And I love Eric Erickson, the stage that he has of psychosocial development here is generativity versus stagnation.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's this age range that you're in, and that's the stage that's most associated with this stage, like 40 to 65 or something like that. And it, you know, that's the invitation in actually menopause, and we can get stuck in that stagnation place. But if there are others around us supporting, at some point we're going to say, wait, I want to be generative. I want to move into this next season with letting like all of that, I mean, all of that stuff burn away. Those hot flashes, let them burn away
Mm-hmm.
all of the stuff that no longer serves me and move into a new season with, you know, some generativity, with some creativity, with some curiosity. What's next?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have a friend, a doctor who talks about asking her patients, "What do you want?"
Mhm.
And most of the time at this point in your life, it hasn't mattered what you wanted because you had to raise kids and do a job and, take care of whatever the things you needed to do. And all of a sudden you're at this inflection point where you're like, okay, maybe I get to choose what I want to do next. And that can be scary for people who've never had to do that before or don't even know how to do that before. How do you approach this with mental health and menopause with women who are, at this, you know, uh, hallway or fork in the road or whatever it
Yeah,
is that,
yeah.
you're facing from what's next for you?
Yeah, I noticed that Trisha Wilkerson in her podcast, she said this, but this is my favorite word actually with clients. If you work with me, you will hear me say this again and again and again. It's notice.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Just notice. So that's all I do. And I just mostly when people are stuck in that hallway, I just invite them to start noticing.
mm,
Start noticing, and they don't have to do anything about what they notice. I am just saying, notice, is there anything that you're like, you have a flicker? Like,
mm,
oh, that sounds kind of interesting.
mm.
Oh, no, I don't want to go to that social gathering.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Uh, just starting to notice those things. And then the next step is to start acting on those noticings. You can stay in the noticing for a while, but then say, okay, so I don't want to go to that social gathering because I actually feel like crap.
Mhm.
Um, then you have to decide to not go.
Right.
And another thing I'm really good at doing with in therapy is I have a little post-it, some post-its, and I will write permission slips for these women saying,
Yeah.
you do not have to, you do not have to go to the social gathering, because again, we
Yep.
got so good at giving other people permission to not do things, but
Right.
we never learned how to do that for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's just really helpful to have a little piece of paper. And I
Mhm.
even sometimes do that for myself. I write myself little permission slips. It helps.
I love that. Sometimes I feel like I could put that on my bathroom mirror. Like, you have permission to.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I often say to people when I'm coaching, when they're like, I don't know, I'm like, well, pretend you do know.
Hmm.
Let's just
Mhm.
What
pretend
if
for
you
a
did
minute you
know?
know what door you'd go through. Why
Hmm.
don't you go be curious about that, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like a miracle question, right? The miracle question, which is like, if everything, you could do whatever you want, have whatever you want, if everything would go away, what's left? Like, what would you
Right.
want? And if
What do you
people
want?
can, yeah, it is, yeah, fun to do that.
It's a gift to yourself that you haven't figured out how to give or get before. And so it's a little scary, but also it's a little exhilarating once you figure out that, oh, you can notice, you can do something different. Yeah.
Hmm. It's
Mhm.
freeing.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Kim, I'm just wondering as we begin to wrap up the conversation, what changes would you like to see? I'm sure you have many, um, as society addresses the intersection of menopause and mental health. What would you like to see?
Well, I'm seeing it with the two of you and
Hmm.
what you are doing to educate women and workplaces and men and all the people about what's going on. I definitely see that. That is so needed. The more that we talk about this, the more that we see creative ways to go forward. I'd love to see more research, more funding
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
women's mental and physical health. I mean, I don't know. There's that book, Invisible Women. I can't remember who it's by, but it's just, atrocious in terms of the lack of funding for women's
Hmm.
health
Hmm.
studies and things like that. So I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see us enter into more of a playful space around like this idea of seasons and transitions and normalizing that we actually change is a good thing.
Hmm.
And that sometimes it sucks how it happens and it's not, there's uncomfortable things that happen. But if we can reframe change as being, um, yes, it can be scary, but there's an invitation always, I think, embedded in change.
Hmm.
Yes, for
Um,
sure. Just a
and
whole nother
so,
podcast.
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It'd be a good one though. So
It would be.
we'll come back and to that one, Kim. Yeah. Yeah. Those are all good, Kim. And we completely agree with you on all three of those.
Yes.
Especially that research piece. We need that. Again, could be a whole other podcast, as we unpack that. But before we let you go, we have our last question that we ask everyone. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever received or given?
That's a hard one. And I'm going to answer it in a kind of menopausal way, in the sense that it depends. It depends on the day or the mood or what's going on in terms of
Yeah.
what is the advice I most needed to hear. But I think consistently, and this is so silly and so simple, but it is something I return to again and again. And it was my own therapist who basically just kind of drilled into me to, can you be kind and curious to yourself and about your experience? And kind and curious. And I can do that for other people, but I have always struggled around that for myself. And even last night, I had an experience. I was at a social event, and I went into a complete shame spiral. And I'm still like this morning, like in that place, but I've like been like, oh, can I be kind to myself about this? Can I be kind and curious around why I went into the spiral? What triggered that? And so that's, I think, where I come back to a lot, is that kind and curious about myself.
Yeah.
And to myself.
That's such a good thing to do for yourself too. We don't do that very well.
No, but it's good. Kind and curious. Yeah,
And
I
that
love
I think really applies to women in menopause. I mean, like, can you be kind to yourself? What does that look like? And in this moment, and then can you be curious?
Yeah. That feels emotional to me a little bit, if I'm honest, right? Can you be kind to yourself? I don't know if we think about what that would mean. So I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that's a little like thing we should just keep in our head in those moments. Like, okay, what would this be like if I was being kind? Kind. We know how to be kind, just not to ourselves.
Not to ourselves.
Oh, well, Kim, what a great pleasure to have you on. We wanted to do this for a long time. We think the world of you, obviously, but the work that you're doing is so important. And thank you for creating community, for helping people find their truth, for supporting people through trauma, big T, little t trauma, because those are hard things to get through. So, where can people find you?
They can find us at theaftermathagency.com. We're on Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn. So they can find us that way.
Perfect.
We'll put all of that in the show notes. Thank you again for your time today in this rainy Friday Seattle weather. And until we meet again, everyone, go find joy in the journey.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks,
Thank
Kim.
you both. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Medovia Menopause Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for future episodes, leave a review, and share this episode with a friend. Medovia is out to change the narrative. Learn more at medovia.com. That's MIDOVIA.com.